It is 11:15. We are ready to start. We're here with 3 panelists from different countries that were so kind to join us. I will read their biographies in a short order, and we will have 15-minute presentations for each speaker, and we will have questions and answers at the end of the 3 presentations. We will start with Dr. Igor Shchupak. Dr. Shchupak, a PhD, has completed his dissertation in doctoral studies at Zaporizhia State University in Ukraine, as well as in Toronto University, Canada. Dr. Shchupak is the director of Tkuma, Ukrainian Institute for Holocaust Studies. He is the author of more than 180 scientific works on history published in Austria, Belarus, Israel, Canada, Poland, Russia, Ukraine, and other countries. He's the author of more than 20 history textbooks for secondary schools in Ukraine, recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, and published with a total circulation of more than 1 million copies. Our next speaker will be Dr. Ze'ev Khanin. He's an Israeli expert on Russian Jewish community in Israel and the diaspora, and Israel and former Soviet Union relations and politics. He got his PhD in political science, contemporary history from Moscow Institute for African Studies and the USSR Academy of Sciences in 1989. And in 1991, completed postdoctoral studies in the Institute for Russian and Soviet Studies at the University of Oxford, UK. Since his Aliya to Israel in 1992, he worked as a lecturer and researcher in political and Jewish studies, teaching in different universities in the area. Since 2009, Dr. Khanin serves as chief scientist for the Israeli Ministry of Aliya and Integration. His academic publications include 9 books, 8 edited collections, several monographs, and numerous articles on Israeli, East European, Jewish, and African politics and society. And our final speaker is Dr. Elena Eyngorn, MBA, was born in Ukraine, Zaporizhia. In 1998, she moved with her family to Germany. She obtained her high school degree in Israel and studied industrial engineering at Technical University of Berlin. During her studies, she was elected as a chairwoman of the Federal Union of Jewish Students in Germany and supported the Jewish community in Germany. Dr. Eyngorn has over a decade of experience in the space industry and global innovation community. And we are ready to start. I'm going to spotlight Igor.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for a big honor to be here on this very interesting event. And I'd like to apologize for my ugly English. It's my first after Russian, Ukrainian, Polish. And now I'd like to open my presentation. Just a second. Just a second.
Yes, we can see it, and you can go ahead and enlarge it.
Okay, is it full screen?
Yes, it is full screen.
Okay, and I said about my bad English, and I'd like to say, you know, my mother survived World War II. When she was 5 years old, she and her mother fled from the German troops from Belarus. They went on foot, traveled by train, and reached Siberia. It's around 4,000 kilometers from her home. Mom remembers the bombing of civilians, the shelling of Hitler's troops, which were quickly advancing. From then until today, my mother cannot stand the German language. When someone speaks German on television, my mother still reacts nervously. And now, after the start of the Russian full-scale war against Ukraine, a large number of my Russian-speaking friends have begun to speak Ukrainian. So I think it's better to speak bad English than good imperialist Russian. I returned from Europe and from Ukraine 2 weeks ago. My colleagues and I were engaged in the development of our joint project of Tkuma Institute and Yad Vashem Holocaust Studies in Ukraine for the formation of atmosphere of tolerance. I participate in conferences and seminars. I will not be able to tell everything. I want to end everything I saw in 15 minutes. But I'd like to talk about this voyage. First of all, about Kiev. In Kiev, people walk, visit cafes, walk along streets that change their names of streets. This is a good thing because a street cannot bear the name of a Bolshevik leader or Nazi one. In the photo, you can see the Shor's monument in Kiev. He was proclaimed by Stalin as a Soviet hero of the Civil War. Shors was the commander of the Bohun regiment in the Red Army. This regiment fought against the White Guard and Ukrainian troops, and also carried out bloody anti-Jewish pogroms in 1919. What about Kiev? And what about Ukraine? Russia attacks Kiev almost every day with missiles and Iranian drones. In the photo, you can see the consequences of one such attack. The alarm in Kiev happens sometime 5-6 times a day. You see Iranian drone. When I spent the night in the hotel, the most unpleasant thing to hear was not the explosions, although it is quite scary, but the rumble of Iranian drones, similar to the motors of very bad bike. Not all Kiev residents hide in bomb shelters and the subway, maybe a minority. Firstly, bomb shelters are not enough. They are not always nearby. Secondly, people are tired of hiding from shelling. Therefore, for example, in the hotel's beautiful bomb shelter you see in photo, it's unique shelter, and I saw almost no people on the period, on the time of alarm. About Dnipro, my city. In Dnipro, there was a golden autumn. You see the beauty of nature, but there were terrible spots of destruction from the attacks of the Russians. This is a photo, a gas station near my house that was destroyed by Russian missiles. Now I would like to give an example of a story known in Dnipro. When a full-scale war began, Ukrainian woman Natalia decided to move her 2 children from the city center of Dnipro to the outskirts, to her mother. They are Vasilisa and Ivan. They lived animals. They had this little dog, Jack, and the old dog, his name was Crimea. But on September 29, a Russian rocket hit their house. Grandmother Alla, mother Natalia, daughter Vasilisa, and boy Ivan died. The remains of their bodies were scattered on the neighbors' houses and street. The puppy Jack also died. And when the rescue arrived, The old dog Krim, who survived, was sitting on the ruins of the house. The dog howled and cried. In the end, the father arrived, Vyacheslav Patlan, an officer of the armed forces who defends Ukraine in the east. He gave the dog Krim to his friends and returned to the front. Subsequently, the Ukrainian photographer and artist Anton Khozyakin made such a walk. This picture became a symbol of the grief of Ukrainians as a result of the Russian war. And we have many questions. Why does Russia fight? What do they want? As historian, I believe that imperialist chauvinistic ideology, Russism, reigns in Russia. The majority of Russians, 85%, support Putin's war against Ukraine. They want the restoration of the empire, Soviet Union. They want to dominate other nations. They cannot come to terms with the fact that Ukrainians are free people in free society, like in Europe and America. Russia is not a collective Putin. Putin's Russia accused Ukraine of aggressions, but no one has ever attacked Russia. Instead, Russia attacked Moldova, you see on the map, Pridnestrovia, Georgia in Caucasus, Syria, and Ukraine after 2014. Putin's Russia accused Ukraine of being anti-Russia. Instead, Russian political leaders and propagandists talk about the need to destroy the Ukrainian nation. Putin's Russia accused Ukraine of Nazism. Instead, Russian soldiers commit atrocities and crimes operating civilians as the Nazis did. The Russian Putin regime used Nazi methods in propaganda and in the war against Ukraine. One of Russia's numerous crimes is the rocket attack on the Kyiv TV tower and the destruction of the Babin Yar Memorial Complex. It was in the beginning of this war in March 1st, 2022. Finally, I want to show some illustration about the situation of Jews in Ukraine, which accused of Nazism. Nazism in Ukraine. In Ukraine, few people care about a person's Jewish origin. The fact that Zelensky, a Jew, was elected president is not surprising. A few years ago, in the parliamentary elections in Ukraine, a not very popular politician and Jew, Rabinovich, won twice as many votes as the leaders of two largest nationalist movements in Ukraine combined. There was a time when there were two Jews at the head of the Ukrainian state. You see, President Zelensky and Prime Minister Groisman. Such a situation of planet Earth existed only in Israel. Ze'ev, is it true or no? The world's largest Jewish community center, Menorah, in the center of city, its biggest Jewish community center in the world, is a popular social, culture, educational, hotel, medical center for all Dnipro residents. Menorah Center also became a center for cooperation of the Jewish community with Ukrainian, Crimean Tatar, Chechen, Armenian, Roma, and other organizations. Ukraine is the first country in the post-Soviet space where the study of Jewish history and the Holocaust is mandatory in all education institutions in all public schools of Ukraine. Our Tkuma Institute organized together with the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, you see on this photo, we organized a system of seminars on Holocaust history for teachers and heads of education department in each oblast of Ukraine. At the contest of Ministry of Education and Science and Tkuma Institute, lessons of war and Holocaust, lessons of tolerance, students and teachers of once again present impressive works on Holocaust history. In particular, drew parallels between the Holocaust and present situation, present genocide against Ukrainians. Our Tkuma Institute published books on the Holocaust history with supporting of Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine and different scholarly institutions. We published special scholarly journal, unique journal with official supporting of Ministry of Education and Science, and a big honor for me that the Dr. Ze'ev Khanin, member of the team of the board of academical board of this journal. I and my colleagues, scientists and teachers and methodologists, Jews and Ukrainians, are the authors of basic history textbooks for students of Ukraine. This one, or this picture, my textbooks with no 1 million, I'd like to correct, 2.5 million copies was published. Is this one example of my textbook with description of history of Holocaust crime of Nazis, with description of collaboration and a very important point, Jewish resistance to Holocaust and about righteous amount nations. It's obligatory chapter of regular curriculum in state program and in textbooks in Ukraine. And you know about narrative in a Russian textbook of history. But in Ukraine, months ago, my colleagues from the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine completed the update of the history study program in Ukraine, the main regulatory document for all schools in the country. And in the program, topics about anti-Jewish pogroms during Khmelnytsky and at the beginning of 20th century, pogroms by all forces, including Ukrainian ones, were added to the existing mandatory topics about the Holocaust, about the history of Israel, about righteous amount nations, about Nazi collaboration, and etc. And last example, interesting, the name of Golda Meir has been added to the list of political figures whose study is mandatory for Ukrainian students. Ukrainian Jews fight in the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine against the Russian aggressors. You see pictures of my friends, Natan Khazin, Yevgen Titorenko, Pavlo Khazan, Dmitro Fiala, unfortunately died. Ukraine was and will remain a normal European country with its achievements and problems, with free people is more important. Ukrainians hate slavery, and now they hate the Russian peace as Jews hated Nazism during World War II. We believe in victory, and Ukraine will win. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I just have tears. We will You're just very close to my heart too, but we will move on. Thank you, Dr. Shchupak. Dr. Khanin, please. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Can't hear you. We can't hear you. Can't hear you. Please unmute yourself.
No sound.
We can
Okay.
hear you now.
You just muted me automatically, so I'm.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, thanks very much for inviting me. It's my pleasure and privilege to address to this very distinguished audience the first experience in my career of this kind. So after this very moving and very impressive presentation of Dr. Igor Shchupak, I am sorry to stand a little bit away to a more academic mood of my view of my presentation. And actually, I would like to say a few words about Israeli perspective of Russian-Ukrainian war. And in fact, we are talking about three different perspectives, which are actually interrelated, of course. The first is bilateral perspective, meaning relations between Jerusalem and Kiev and Jerusalem and Moscow in the context of the situation which started after the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. The second perspective is the regional one. Israel, what can we do? Also, it's civilizationally and culturally a European country. In fact, it's East European country. However, geographically, we're in Asia, in the Middle East. So we have to take this fact into account while we are talking about Israeli foreign policy toward Russia and Ukraine and Eastern Europe and the context, understanding the global context of Israeli interests and cooperation with various partners, including Ukraine. And the third perspective is the Jewish perspective. Israel is a Jewish country, and it's the state of Israel is the state not only of Israelis and not only of Israeli Jews, but it's also the state of all Jewish people all over the world. At least because of the fact that any Jews of the diaspora is able and eligible to get immediate citizenship if he would like to after coming to Israel. So let me address very briefly 3-4 minutes to each of these perspectives. Let's start with the bilateral issues. Here we have two subjects. One is the public opinion in Israel concerning this war, and second is official Jerusalem policy in concern of the war. As far as the public aspect is concerned, Israelis are totally pro-Ukrainian. It's totally mobilized in favor of Ukraine, morally, diplomatically. I'm talking about public diplomacy. Financially, 80%, according to the polls, 80% of Israelis, including more than 80% of those who came from the former Soviet Union, what we call the third Israel, a Russian Israel, or Russian-speaking Israel. They're actually on side of Ukraine. A very impressive move, impressive change. If you take into account the fact that my recent studies of the community of Olim immigrants from the FSU show that majority of this community is actually rather indifferent in the situation in the Ukraine-Russian relations before this open invasion, open war started. According to the polls of our research, in 2014 and 2015, only 10% of Russian-speaking Israelis took either side in this conflict. 5 years later, only 5% were actively on either side, either Ukraine or Russia, and another 20% actually took a passive approach, meaning they are on either side, but according to them, Israel should not interfere. After a Russian invasion of Ukraine, the situation changed completely. We almost do not have a pro-Russian aspirations. It's a very small group, a very marginal group, which in fact, many of them were stimulated by pro-Russian lobby in the Russian embassy. But majority of Russian-speaking and not Russian-speaking Israelis, they believe that the truth on Ukrainian side. We know that a lot of people just recruited themselves, not just stood for Ukraine, but they contribute money, they support refugees in Eastern Europe and in Israel. They work and participate in pro-Ukrainian events and so on and so forth, which means the public opinion and the civil society of Israel is actually pro-Ukrainian. It could be even more if I have to say it. I'm sorry to tell it, but I have to tell it that in the recent times, not a few Israelis, quite a number of Israelis express misunderstanding of official Kiev policy in terms of Ukraine, voting in United Nations in support of anti-Israeli resolution, making anti-government campaign here in Israel, interference in the Israeli elections, and so on and so forth. But in Hebrew we say, which we shouldn't blame a person in the situation of distress. So at the moment, it's not a time to speak about. I'm talking about this because we understand each other, I guess, and I hope everybody who is on this Zoom will understand me correctly. But I guess at the moment, all things that are not related to war itself are actually Israeli society is ready to put aside. Meaning we all agree, and Igor and Lena, who know the situation, probably, I hope, agree with me, that Ukraine now is a different country. It's not the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. It's not the, occupied by Germany territory of this in the time of the Second World War. It's not Eastern province of the Rzeczpospolita. It's just it's a different, independent, self-sustainable country, which can permit itself to speak quietly and carefully about their heroes and about other side, of the image of the society. And it's the question of historians. So at the moment, Israel is ready to put aside anything, remembering Holocaust, so on and so forth, and heroization of those who participated with the fascist. It's not relevant at the moment, The government is a different story. The government has to take into account the interest of the state of Israel and interest of Israeli society. And here I come to the second perspective, the regional one. The regional perspective is that Israel is about and Jewish community in the Mandate Palestine before the establishment of the state of Israel. That's about 100 years. We are in war with the cruel and radical enemy. Israel is fighting here in the Middle East the radical Islamist movement, stand against Iranian aggression, stand against those who promote Iranian proxies, and so on and so forth. But that means that Israel has to survive. We still have to survive. Israel, if you will have a look once again on the vote in the United Nations, you will see that at least half of the countries of the world still not sure that the Jewish state and a Jewish state has any right to exist, either in the Middle East or anywhere in the world. So these things should be taken into account while we are talking about official Israeli policy in concern of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Let's not forget, in the 2015, Russian army became a neighbor of Israel on the Syria, on the northeastern, over the northeastern border of Israel in Syria. They support the authoritarian regime of the Assad family, supported by Russia on one hand and Iran on the other hand, and became a channel of provision of most advanced armament from these two sides, two parties, to radical Islamist movement like Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Iran is quickly developing is a nuclear industry and is ready to reach to obtain the nuclear armament very shortly. So all this should be taken into account. And while fighting with the enemy in the Middle East, it's not an Israeli interest to open another front with another enemy, meaning Russia, as our Ukrainian friends and colleagues actually demand from us. So at the moment, Israel provides a lot of humanitarian aid to Ukrainian people, supports diplomatically, votes in favor of Ukraine. In most cases, in the United Nations and international organizations, and I'm afraid that is maximum which Israel is able to do, besides things that we would prefer not to speak aloud about it. Okay, there are things like that, but I guess somebody will write a book in 30 years from now about it. Meantime, it's better not to speak about it. The third perspective, I have 4 minutes more. The third perspective is the Jewish perspective. Let's take into account the fact that, as I said, Israel should care about Jewish communities in Ukraine and Jewish communities in Russia and in Belarus. For the first time after the Second World War, ladies and gentlemen, we have a phenomenon of Jewish refugees in Europe. For the first time in 100 years, after First World War I, we have the situation when Jews fight each other in opposing armies, in the Russian army and Ukrainian army. At the moment, Israel has not an easy dilemma. It's very easy to think about what shall we do with the Ukrainian refugees. Any Ukrainian Jew is able to come to Israel and to get what is eligible to get, and even more than that. So Israeli government allocated the status of refugee even to Olim, to new immigrants, the Jewish immigrants and their family members that come to Israel. Of course, we have about 30,000 of non-Jewish refugees in Israel. 20,000 of them, about 20,000, were in Israel before the war started, like an illegal labor migrants. After the beginning of war, they were granted official status in Israel. Another 10,000 and a little bit more are actually refugees in the time of the war, non-Jewish refugees, which actually got the status of protected immigrants in Israel until the end of the war. But concerning the Ukrainian Jews that are coming to Israel, the peak was in April, in May, and then at the moment, the Ukrainian Aliya, Jewish Aliya, stopped. Most of Ukrainian Jews that left the country, they prefer Europe. Lena might say much more about that. So most of the immigrants, Jewish immigrants that come to Ukraine, come from Russia and from Belarus. So we have about 500,000 Jewish community in Russia, which are actually hostages of Russian regime. We have to think about them, what would happen with them. We are responsible for them. So that may be a sort of an answer to those who say why Israel doesn't stop flights or air exchange with Moscow, why Israel doesn't join the anti-Russian sanctions. Well, it's a good question. In fact, Israel is a part of that. But we have to take, we can conclude that when we hear from Kiev that Israel should be on the side of the civilized world, our answer is very easy. We are on the side of the civilized world. We are part of the Western Bloc. We support Ukraine, and we are a bulwark of defense of the civilized world against the most radical regimes supported by other radical regimes. But we are fighting in our own front here in the Middle East. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Khanin. This as well speaks to me as I grew up in Israel, and I appreciate this perspective for myself and for our participants. And thank you again. We are now going to move to our last presentation, and then we'll do questions and answer section at the end. Dr. Eyngorn, please.
Hello, everybody. I prepared a presentation, but in presentation I have just the tables and numbers and figures. But I think like after such emotional speeches of my teachers, I can't be just like go into details of the figures. I will also like speak with you about like my personal story. And first of all, thank you for the possibility to thank you guys for something that really changed the not just my personal life, but also the life of a lot of Soviet Jews had the possibility to be raised in the Jewish education. And I'm speaking about you, those community leaders and community members that in the beginning of 70s, 80s, protested against the Soviet regime and like with the slogans, "Let my people go," went to the streets and showed the real civilian like movement, showed the protests and the support with the Jewry, the Soviet Union. And really thanks to that, I had a very Jewish education in Ukraine. And I'm thankful to my teachers, Igor and Ze'ev, who really did a lot that I will also speak today with you about the situation in Ukraine. And that's really like that the world is round. Everything that he did in the past, we were raised like as the children of 90s. We were raised like with the principles of democracy, Jewish values, and the ideas that each of us is responsible for another, not just Jew, but also like a human being in the world. And I was raised in Ukraine, but as we left Ukraine with my parents in 1998, I will lie if I will tell you that I felt as a homeland to Ukraine at some point. We left Ukraine and we started our life in Germany. And all our commitments were with Israel as mostly for the whole Jewish community, not just in Germany, but in the whole world. So we supported Israel, our homeland, although we were living in Germany, our homeland was still in Israel, and all our commitments were towards Israel. And the world changed for us, for the Jewish community in Germany on 24th of February, because like the Russia not just invaded Ukraine, it's not that they just did start the war against Ukraine. They probably started the war against whole humanity and of course against Europe. We in Europe, in Germany, in Poland, but the whole Europe really feels like on the border of battle line. I speak to my friends in the States and in Israel, and I feel that the situation in Israel and the States is a little bit different. It's very far away from Ukraine. We are very close to Ukraine, and it's not just that we have information from the news. We have information from the people coming to Berlin, to Germany, to Europe every day, their personal stories, mostly just women with kids. And that's exactly as Ze'ev pointed already, that for the first time, of course, we had Syrian refugees in Germany, but it's a little bit different. They were immediately put into like closed camps. And it was not that we had like refugees on the streets. Right now, we have like millions of refugees on the streets. We are talking about 12 million people who left Ukraine since 24th of February. Most of them landed in Germany, Poland, Hungary. But of course, like also small countries in Europe are totally crowded by refugees and these personal stories. And that's why we also, of course, feel like on the battle line. So since we left Ukraine, I worked with Ukraine, I cooperated with Ukraine, I went to conferences and congresses, I did master classes in the mostly all universities in Ukraine. And on 24th of February, during the day, I was called, like, of course, by relatives and friends, but I was called by the rector of the main technical university in Kiev, and the university with which I cooperated for years, but like, that's a rector, and he's calling me, although, like, also because I'm speaking Russian, Ukrainian, still I need to stress that I continue to speak Russian. And all of the Ukrainian people, it's also like Igor, of course, like, I understand the point, but you also need to understand that all of the Ukrainian people who are communicating with me since 9 months, we speak Russian to each other, because they know that my Ukrainian is not so good, and for them it's not a problem. So it's not, Russian language is not a problem. Just like also like very important information. So he contacted me and said, you know, you're the only person in Europe I know who speaks Russian, and can you please help? Our students are going to the army, we need medicine, we need equipment, we need, and that's how I found myself in the volunteering movement. And that's also like very important statement, that summary, like, from the 9 months. Ukraine needs us. Ukraine really needs us. Medicine, money, support, even just like the mutual support is needed. But what is more important, we, people from the Western countries, from the States, from the Germany, Europe, Israel, we need Ukraine even more. And I will explain to you my point. Because, like, it's really a test for us. It's a test for human beings. It's a test for democracy. It's a test for civil society. And the percentage or the number of our involvement in the war, in the support, in the aid, in our commitment with Ukraine in these days, it's just like a sign. If we did the test that our, like, my grandparents survived the war, and I was raised with the sentence that the most important in the world is not the wealth, not, like, even beyond the education, and you know how the education is very variable in the Jewish families. We need the peace. And that's kind of a test that we are facing right now, the test that we need Ukraine even more than Ukraine needs us. Ukraine will win. Ukraine will stay independent, and everything, I have no doubt that everything will be fine with Ukraine. But the question is if the the Western world will proceed the test. And to summarize, I like the whole volunteering during the war, I just like want to share with you one story that I was also involved in, like just a little bit, but that's also the face of the war in Ukraine. In the beginning of March, I was called, like, by the people from Zaporozhye, like organization that I was supporting with the medicine. And they asked me, like, Lena, you speak German. Can you please speak to German? We have a German here and we can't understand. He doesn't speak like our English is also not so good. Like, can you speak? So I'm talking to a German who was captured by the Ukrainian army, by the soldiers, and they were surprised, like in the middle of the war, in the middle of the minefield, they capture a German, and they're trying to understand, like, what is he doing? And of course, like, you also need to understand that that's the war, and people, there are a lot of collaborators, like, and also it's a problem of the language, like, because like the enemy speaks the same language as the people who are suffering from the war. It's also like not easy. So I'm talking to him, and it appears he met like a year ago, he met a girl from suburb of Zaporozhye that is occupied right now by the Russian army. And she wrote him the last message before like her like maybe connection was destroyed by the army, that she's occupied, like her village is occupied by the Russian army, and she cannot meet him in Europe as they planned in April. So he left everything, and just with the bag, he's going to Ukraine with the Google Maps. And the Google map shows the road like which is like faster, will bring him faster to the village than everything other. So he goes through the minefield and was captured by the Ukrainian army, who just like couldn't understand like what a German is doing in the fields of Ukraine. So they took him, I explained them, like I spoke to him, and he asked me if I can rely on him. And at that point I understood I'm not prepared to do war. Like how can I answer the question? Like he's okay, like in the peaceful time. So they put him, they took him to Zaporozhye, and then they discovered that in Germany, he has a bakery. He's like a very good baker. He has his own bakery from like generations. So he decided to stay in Zaporozhye and wait to the girl to be saved from this village. And the Ukrainian army promised him that they will somehow take the girl out of the village. So he stayed in Zaporozhye for 3 months and opened like a help bakery, like to bake good German bread. So he said that Zaporozhye never tasted such a bread like as it was, and they took the girl out of the village, like sent the Ukrainian army, and right now they're in Germany. And that's like just like one short story about how, but like you just like need to understand that all you have seen in the Hollywood and all kinds of movies about the war, they are not explaining what's happening right now. Women and children and suffering, and also like one more thing, like Ze'ev knows me and we are constantly in contact with him. And I always told him that I live in Germany, I am a good citizenship here, a citizen of German state. I'm paying taxes, I do everything that I have to do, but there was no like kind of love affair between me and Germany. And I must admit that since 24th of February, I admire the German state and the whole support, not just like with the aid that they give to refugees in Germany, giving the medical care, money for apartments, all kind of aids that refugees need. But they also people, human, like just normal Germans, support Ukraine every day. I never felt such a unity in Germany as I'm feeling right now. And just to summarize, that's really my personal observation, that we need Ukraine much more right now than Ukraine needs us. Thanks for your attention and open to the questions.
Dr. Eyngorn, thank you so much for bringing the German perspective to this conflict, bringing the war closer to us, and talking about the stories that you personally were involved and have been, and I know you are still very, very involved in helping people from across the border, as well as those that are refugees in Germany. I also want to say a special thank you to you as a catalyst for this event to happen. As it stands, you have introduced me to Dr. Khanin, and you have introduced me to Dr. Shchupak, and that's how this event has been possible. And we've been working on this for 3 months. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We will now take questions, and we have our first question from Dr. Rosenberg. He's he's a professor at a local university, Drexel University, and also an instructor for us at Golden Slipper Gems. Dr. Rosenberg, please.
Hi, good afternoon or good evening, depending upon where you're located. I found the talks to be very interesting. One particular point that I hadn't ever really thought about was something that was brought up by Vladimir about Jews fighting Jews, which is a very unique situation. And being a citizen of the United States, that's what we faced in our Civil War in the 1860s, where brother versus brother or cousin versus cousin were fighting. For Jews, this has not really been something that's happened that often, although I'm sure there are historical examples, particularly during World War I, with Germany and France and Belgium and countries like that. But I just wanted to pay special note to that. Just a couple of things that I would ask, answering could raise is the distribution of Jews in Ukraine. Okay, you know, Ukraine used to be, as everyone knows, part of the Soviet Union. It broke off, became an independent state. It's gone through a lot of machinations. But my sense, which may be wrong, but I never see any reports of it, of where do Jews live in Ukraine? In other words, do they live in the Donbas region? Is that something that there's a high concentration or not? Or are they more concentrated by Kherson or by Kyiv or wherever? Because I think that plays a role in the ultimate sort of Jewish question of resolution for Ukraine, because it looks like from the outside that the Ukrainians will maintain the land that they had pre-2014 or just after 2014, excuse me, but maybe not some of those eastern regions in Crimea. And I'm just wondering, you know, where will the Jews end up being hostages to the Russians? And I guess that's my main question for you. And the second part is the issue about sort of the exhaustion of the West. How long will countries like United States, Poland, Germany, and others continue to send massive amounts of aid to the Ukrainians to fight the war against the Russians? And will there be, now we hear rumblings in the United States of the Republicans wanting to cut that back? I'm just wondering how that resonates with you folks as well. So 2 questions: where do the Jews live? How will that impact an ultimate settlement if they're not able to push the Russians out? And also the exhaustion of the West in terms of financial support, military support, and energy. So I'll leave it at that.
Dr. Rosenberg, thank you. Dr. Rosenberg teaches political science, and I appreciate your questions. I'll direct the first questions to Dr. Shchupak. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. This question, like lecture, very interesting lecture and point of view. I'd like to say a few remarks about first question. I think we can say about different mental understanding of Jewish community life and different identities, Jewish identity in Russia and in Ukraine. And we can say about the creation of Ukrainian political civilian nation with Ukrainians, Jewish origin, Tatars, and etc. The same in Russia. It's one point. Second point, you know about Jewish community life in Ukraine and about centers of Jewish community life. First of all, it's Dnipro city. Not, I say about through reality. It's Kyiv, it's Odessa, and other cities. And I can say majority Jewish are patriots of Ukraine. And majority Jewish community are a member of Ukrainian political nation. And you're right. This war has characteristics of First World War, when no, this is traditional situation of civil war, but now it's not civil war. It's the war between civilization, between future society and society of 19th century, between national state and empire and imperialism. And from this reason, I think Jewish has choice for civilization, choice for Europe and America, choice for uniting with future, but not with past, with Soviet Union. A special point, the situation with Jewish communities on occupation territories. It's special and very sensitive point, and more important in this case, the supporting, humanitarian supporting to these communities. But majority Jewish from occupied territory are refugees to other chapter of Ukraine and to Europe, including Germany. We see beautiful speech of Elena. About second question, from my approach, if we have the situation of war between two civilizations, Western civilization can't hide from this war, can't repeat the situation after Munich Pact of 1938. The Russian Empire need destroy like empire. No, I'm not against Russian population, Russian people. I against 19th century and understanding of world like the space of fate between big players. I think the future is the future of democracy, of liberal values, and independent countries, including Ukraine, Russia, Bashkortostan, Buryatia, Caucasus, but it will be choice of these people.
I'll direct another part of the question to Dr. Eyngorn about the exhaustion of the West for the war. Is there any feeling towards it in where you are?
I don't think they heard your question.
Yeah, did you hear my question, Dr. Eyngorn?
Can you repeat it once more,
Yeah,
please?
sure. So Dr. Rosenberg asked about the West being exhausted from supporting refugees, from supporting Ukraine. Is there any feeling towards that in where you are, or in a larger context outside of Germany?
It's about the waves, of course. Like there are like more or less like, of course, at some point people are tired, and if, for example, from February till I would say June, like I would say 80% of people really, like in Berlin, really supported and went to the train stations and picked up the refugees. Like right now, of course, it's a little bit less, but still the support is very big. Like, of course, people are a little bit tired, and there is like not so much resources, also personal resources, because like we have our families, we have our main job, and that's clear. But still, like new people are coming, and some people are taking like a couple of weeks of rest, like without helping Ukraine, but then they are coming back. Like it's from different sides. And also, like, to the question about the Jewish refugees, it's very interesting also, like what Ze'ev told, that most of the Jewish refugees didn't go to Israel. And I think that's probably like a clear clear reason why. First of all, we need to understand that Jewish people who stayed in Russia and Ukraine mostly, of course, like I'm speaking on the community level, mostly they are Jewish, but without like strong Jewish community identity. They are Jewish, they like, for example, like Zelensky, like he's Jewish, but he's not committed to a Jewish community. He's not like giving Jewish education to his kids. He's baptized, I think, or like even. So most of the Jewish refugees I face coming from Ukraine. Of course, there are Chabad communities, and that's something like totally different. These are religious people coming to religious communities, and they also remain like a religious community in Germany. But most of the refugees, Jewish refugees, they feel themselves more Ukrainian than Jewish. And for them, like there is no purpose to go to Israel. First of all, Europe is much more close to Ukraine. So nobody wants to stay in Germany. We need to understand that that's not the type of, because in the Russian propaganda, there is like a very heavy statement that all these refugees feel like that the war gave them a chance to stay in Europe. That's not true. All of them want to go home. They speak about like, they don't want to stay in Europe, even with the understanding that Europe is a little bit better in the standards of living than Ukraine, but still. And from this point, the Jewish refugees, they are more Ukrainian than Jewish.
Very interesting. Dr. Khanin, would you like to add about the situation in Israel, Israel being such a small country and absorbing so many people?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I agree with my colleagues, with Lena and with Igor. Actually, according to research that we've done very recently in 2019 and 2020 in the former Soviet Union, we really, and numerous studies that were done in other communities of FSU Jewish immigrants in Israel, in North America, in Europe, and so on, we see there are two different trends: conversions and diversions. In the FSU, it is true, we have a process of dispersion of the so-called Soviet and post-Soviet Jewish identity and establishment of the new local, I call it ethno-civic Jewish groups, the issue which I tried to develop in my forthcoming book, but that will appear January, February next year, that we have the establishment of the new Jewish sub-ethnicities or communities in the places with a substantial concentration of Jews within the borders of the former Soviet republics, or a high level of coercion of this group, meaning Ukrainian Jewry, Russian Federation Jewry, Moldovan Jewry, Kazakhstan Jewry, Belarusian, and so on and so forth. In Israel, and in some way also in North America, you might agree with me, there is a sort of on the contrary, there is a conversion. That means in Israel, we have a sort of a conversion of integration of Jews that come from the former Soviet republics, from different places, in what we call the third Israel. That means Russian-speaking Israel. According to the very recent poll, we did it in May on behalf of the Ministry of Aliya and Integration in Israel, of the new wave of very recent immigrants from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Among the questions, that was a question: which language you define as yours, that meaning your ethnic symbol, and which language you use to communicate with your close ones in the family and friends and so on. The story is exactly the same like in Ukraine, for instance. Yeah, like majority of Jews declare, and non-Jews in Ukraine declare that my national language is Ukrainian, but the difference between, the share of those who continue to speak Russian among Jews and non-Jews in Eastern Ukraine to their close ones didn't change dramatically, you know, that 5%, 7% growth. In Israel, among those who came from Russia and Ukraine, we have like 98%. They said that the language of communication is Russian, and more than 70% of those who came from Ukraine, they said the language of communication is Russian. Another 20% told us that the language of communication is Russian and Ukrainian together. That means in Israel, this is not Russian language and Russian culture, is not geopolitical threat, like it is accepted in Ukraine or in East European countries like Poland, Baltic states, and so on and so forth. So I believe that it's still going to be lingua franca on the what we call transnational post-Soviet Jewish diaspora. That's one thing. The second point that happened within the waves of Aliya of 19th, of 2000, of those who came after the annexation of Crimea after 2014, and that what more or less happens now, that people very quickly get local specific Israeli identity of people who came from the former Soviet Union. Concerning the second question of Professor Rosenberg, I would say that in Israel, it was more or less will be like in the United States. In the United States, we hear that they still continue or interested to continue help of Ukraine, but I believe that the more war continues, the more donors will demand more transparency in using this money. In what way? And these uneasy questions will be asked. In what way this money are used, whether they used according to direct aims that they were allocated, or there is a sort of a mismanagement of manipulation in using of these resources. But that's another question, and I hope it will not prevent the West to continue supporting Ukraine in this war.
I appreciate.
Is it possible?
Yeah.
Is it possible? I'd like to add a few words. First of all, I absolutely agree with Elena and with Ze'ev. But one point about a Russian language, like lingua franca, is true. It's true now. But the question of language is political question, and a question of national identity, Ukraine or Russia. And the situation with language will be changed. And you need to understand on the period of Second World War, Jew can't choose Wagner music or Nietzsche philosophy. And now majority Jews in Ukraine don't want to read Pushkin or Dostoevsky. It's political choice, and the tendency of development of attention to language like part of culture and national identity will be different. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Dina.
I would also probably add to that it might be true. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, we just have one more question. I want to make sure that we get the questions. We just have 7 minutes left. Dina, please go ahead.
Yes, I thank you so much for being here and addressing our group. My question is about whether, and is for any of you think that Ukraine will agree to sit down with Putin and to a compromise, such as letting Russia keep the Crimea or not, if it would end the war?
I would say jump in, please jump in, panelists, so go ahead, whoever wants to take this on.
We saw the pictures presented by Dr. Shchupak. Compromise on what? Just forget tomorrow what happened. It's very difficult to believe.
Right, but you know, that's one of the things that the newscasters will say, well, you know, Ukraine eventually have to sit down at the table with Russia. What would they give up? What would they, or would they demand the whole country?
Yeah, okay, here in the Middle East, we say that the end of each war is a compromise and peace. The question is how much time it takes. Here in the Middle East, it takes about 100 years, and it is still not over. So I don't know how much time it will take in Eastern Europe.
Okay.
First of all, I agree with Ze'ev, and the situation between Russia and Ukraine build new characteristics like the situation between Arabian and Jewish Arabian countries and Israel. But about negotiations and compromise with Putin, no reason with compromise, no reason with compromise with crazy Hitler. Can you say about compromise with Hitler or I don't know, Hafiz Assad or Kim Chen-in? No reason. And we hope for changes in military situation, because I can't hope for radical change in Russian society.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Eyngorn, I know you wanted to add something. Go ahead.
Igor told already, like, the only sentence I can say, like, as a Jewish people, could we imagine in 1943, 1944, if the world would make like compromises or negotiations with Hitler? It's just like, it's impossible. That's exactly the same situation that is happening right now, but not to Jewish people, but to Ukrainian people.
Okay,
Yeah, I
Christopher?
think the center. I think that the center of post-Soviet Jewry is now moving abroad. So Israel is going to be the major center of Ukrainian Jewry, Russian Jewry, Belarusian Jewry. It's, you know, since we have umbrella, a symbol that unites everybody, it doesn't really matter which language will be lingua franca. Let's make it Hebrew. I don't mind. But I believe that in this generation, Russian and Russian Jewish culture still will be available and important.
Thank you. Christopher, go ahead.
Okay, just very quickly. First of all, I really appreciate the clarification of the priorities in Israel in terms of the fundamental one is survival and having to make the choices to do that. And I appreciate the clarity of your statement on that. What I suppose I have, a concern that I have is how long people pay attention to this. You know, the further away from Ukraine, we live in a culture. This is generalization in this country that seems to think, you know, whatever the newest trend, the newest concern that's on the deck. We have a whole new political situation that actually has been solidified as of yesterday in terms of our Congress. So we have our own priorities here, and I'm not sure what that ultimately will translate into. And I appreciate Igor's comment about connecting to the Munich agreement, and I get concerned when what happened when Crimea happened? Where was everybody? Why did it take so many years for us to respond to that in the way that we drew a line in the sand? I think there's a tendency sometimes for us to move into appeasement again. And I'm concerned. I don't think that appeasement is the way to go. I think it's time to draw the line and say, this is what we stand for, and this is what we will do. Do not go any further. And I hope that our people in this country are supportive of that position. I'm just aware right now there is the distraction of the political distraction in this country are truly incredible right now, truly incredible. And I'm not sure where we're heading over the next 2 years. That's why I'm going to keep track of what Bill's going to have to say further down the road when he comes in to speak to us again. I just needed to share that. It's more of an observation, a comment than anything else. And thank you all for your comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Indeed.
Christopher. Definitely bring an American perspective to this.
Thank you very much.
And that's what it's about as we bring the world closer together when we discuss action to, in relation to the war in Ukraine. Marjorie, go ahead, please.
Yes, very, very quickly. We perceive, and Zelensky is presented to the world as being Jewish, but it's very fuzzy, at least, and I've tried to even look into that, what real connection he has, if any, to Judaism. I know his parents were sort of secular Jews, and he married someone who isn't Jewish, but as a Jew, I don't have a clear picture of him as a Jew, although others may. So can you just tell us something about Zelensky, and does he actually have tangible connections to Judaism if his wife isn't Jewish and now I hear his children were baptized? Is he an example of, you know, Jews who see their primary identity as being Ukrainian and their religion, if it is anything, is minimal?
I would,
Yeah.
yeah, Dr. Khanin, I would just start with
Yeah,
everyone. You can address it as you go.
Yeah, 20 seconds. We have a different understanding of Judaism in North America, in Israel, and in Eastern Europe. In the Eastern Europe, Judaism is not necessarily religion, it's ethnicity. So Mr. Zelensky could be ethnic Jewish, civically Ukrainian, and religiously Christian. It doesn't contradict to each other. In the West and the United States, Judaism is religion. In Israel, it's both. We have an ethnic confessional Jewish identity. It's both religion and nation and ethnicity. Religion means that if you convert to Christianity, you stop being a part of the Jewish nation in ethnic terms. Yeah, but it's first of all meaning joining Jewish, moving to Israel, whether you are 100% Jewish or half Jewish, a quarter Jewish, regardless whether you're religious or not, you join the Jewish nation, and that means you are a part of the Jewish people. In Israel, it's easy, but I understand your question. In the diaspora, it's much, much more complicated.
I would respectfully say, as an American Jew, that Jews are regarded as being a people and a religion. We are not simply a religion. So there is that melding of Jews culturally and religiously in the United States, which may not be true elsewhere, but it's very clear to me we have it here. So it may be per country, it varies as to how people express their Judaism. But we have such a variety of Jewish sects, positions, whatever you want to call them. We are all over the place. You know, Reconstructionist, Reform, Conservative, Modern Orthodox, Orthodox. We have a very big tent here, much more than in Israel. But the issue of Zelensky always intrigued me because the world sees him as being Jewish. And I'm not sure he is, at least from my perspective.
Dr. Shchupak, yeah, go ahead.
First of all,
And I just want to say that this is going to be our last comment. We are over our time, and I'm thrilled that people are engaging and find the topic, you know, close to.
First of all, I think the answer of Dr. Khanin is, I don't know, it's absolutely encyclopedia point for understanding of the situation. And very shortly, about attention from Ukrainian society to Zelensky. All Ukrainians knows Zelensky are Jew. Next, Zelensky knows he is ethnic Jew from a Jew mother and Jew father. I remember 10 years ago or more, visit of artist Zelensky to synagogue to Dnipro. And Rabbi Kamenetsky said, look, it's very funny Jew you need to know about. And now I think Zelensky more serious. And about identity of Zelensky, we need to ask him, but from Ukrainian society and from her understanding, he is ethnic Jew, but Ukrainian patriot and member of Ukrainian civil society.
Thank you. I actually appreciate
like
that
just like really last sentence also about Jewishness of Zelensky. When he was selected to be a president, I posted something on Facebook, like a quote of Albert Einstein, and he said everything about his theory. If my theory will be awarded, the Americans will say that I'm the person of the world. The Europeans will say I'm European. the Germans will say I'm German. If my theory will not be awarded, the Americans will say I'm European, the Europeans will say he's German, and the Germans would say he's Jewish. So that's everything about you should know about the list.
I'm
From
very happy
this-
that we're finishing up on this positive note, and even though the subject is very tough, but I do appreciate that we're able to finish with a little bit of humor, and we will continue talking about this. Thank you very much for
Thank
taking
you.
the time,
Thank you very
panelists
Thank you
and
very much.
attendees. And we will not have this if we would not have attendees. So we appreciate people signing up for this event, and I wish you all the best and peace, peace, peace.
Amen.
Bye.
Amen. Amen. Bezrat
Bye.
Hashem. With God's help.
Victory and
Am
peace.
Israel
Victory and peace.
Bye-bye.
Yes, Igor, yes.